Hey, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I am James Ward, and I have the great privilege of being your host this evening on FlashPoint. I want to welcome you to the show. Gene is on assignment, and it is an honor to sit here and to greet you on his behalf. All right, well, we got another special guest, a great friend who's here with us. Dinesh D'Souza is a conservative filmmaker, political commentator, and best-selling author. In 2022, he released the film 2,000 Mules, which put a spotlight on many of the issues uncovered in the weeks and months following the 2020 presidential election. Here's the trailer of his latest film, Vindicating Trump.
Somebody has to help this country, and if they don't, the country and the world are in big trouble.
Someone's got to overturn the tables in the temple.
Trump jumping into the presidential race.
She's a bit worried.
Of the Apprentice guy?
You know the feeling of power. Could you handle it or would it devour? Power.
They fear that power. You didn't do an insurrection. Had you called for one, there would have been one. And there would be one if you called for one now.
I'm not sure I want that power. I want the power just to make the country better.
America first!
And that scares them.
A lot about Donald Trump scares them.
Let's look at everything. Campaign, his family. Let's get foreign eyes on him.
We have one target. You know who he is.
Going after their companies, their families. That is a dictator.
It's a very dangerous time for our country.
The goal is to put him in jail because they're so afraid of his voice.
I am your voice.
We'll bury him so deep in legal, it'll bankrupt them.
Broke Donald in jail right before the election. That's
Sorry for being that guy, but isn't that election interference?
It's not interference if we do it.
We just want a free and fair election.
Sounds expensive.
Ballots ain't cheap.
Wait. Did you actually say the word buy the ballots?
We were able to purchase 10,000 ballots.
That's terrifying.
They cheat in many different ways. That's all they're good at.
ready to save democracy.
We need to stop him permanently.
And that person will be risking his life.
Too bad it's not the 60s, right?
It's the way you survived.
And I said, get me up.
Trump has beaten back every attack against him.
It's like the damn Terminator.
We're going to fix our borders, and we're going to fix our elections. We're going to win.
It's my legacy.
Now, Dinesh, welcome back to FlashPoint. You've been with us before. And before we dig in, I just want to find out how you're doing and get your perspective. Washington, D.C., we get a chance to spend time in D.C., and Washington, D.C. is nothing like the Washington, D.C. that's being reported by mainstream media. It's a different beast altogether. How are you? Welcome to the show, and what can you tell us about the real Washington, D.C.?
Well, I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. I think that the place, it was a bit of a cesspool when I worked in the White House, and this is a whole generation ago. I think things have gotten worse. The swamp has gotten deeper. I remember thinking back to the Reagan years, we understood that the press and academia and perhaps the media were biased and somewhat corrupted. We had no idea that the FBI was corrupted in the same way, or the CIA, or the Defense Department. We had no idea that we couldn't trust the people in the white coats, the people at the CDC and the National Institutes for Health. So I think that the Washington that Trump is confronting now is a whole different animal, and one that is in fact actively engaged in trying to suppress our basic liberties.
Yeah, so well stated. And we're going to jump into a little bit about your latest film here. But when that language, folks, is draining the swamp is spoken, it's a real swamp. There's corruption all over D.C., and that swamp still needs to be drained. Well, Dinesh, your latest film recently debuted in theaters across America. Tell us about Vindicating Trump and where people might be able to watch the film.
The film is a persuasive, entertaining, I would say inspiring case for Trump. And the centerpiece of it is a very riveting one-on-one conversation with Trump. I try to ask him questions that he doesn't normally get asked. You can see the tumblers of his mind working. You can see a little bit of a window into his soul. The interview was done after the assassination attempt, so it's very timely, very current. And the film is available for streaming now on multiple platforms. The website is vindicatingtrump.com. There are also DVDs available for sale. And I have a book of the same title, Vindicating Trump, available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the usual places.
Yeah. Now, what can you say? We hear so much about personality. Can you distinguish personality from policy? Having had the opportunity to spend time with Trump working on the film, what can you say to distinguish between the importance of the American people understanding the difference between personality and policy that's good for our nation?
There's very little question that on policy, Trump not only has the better policies on economics, on foreign policy, on the border, but Trump has shown that he actually knows how to implement those policies. And all you have to do is empirically compare the Trump record from the Trump years with the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris record over the last 4 years. And if you think things have been going wonderfully over the past 4 years, you probably should vote for Harris. But if you don't, as I think most Americans don't, then I think we have a tried and true alternative in Trump. Now, the movie and the book makes the case not just for Trump's policies, but also for Trump's character. And this is a little more controversial because there are some Republicans, there are some Christians who say, well, you know, the guy may have an imperfect character, but, you know, he did a good job when he was in office. I think that actually Trump's character is very well suited to the particular crisis in which the country finds itself today. Why? Because this is a guy who has a great deal of inner strength. He has tenacity, he has bravery, and he has shown this courage not just in the way that he has dealt with the legal cases, the 91 criminal cases. I mean, think about it. The guy went 76 years without a single criminal case. And then in the 1 year that he's running for election a second time, boom, 91 cases in multiple jurisdictions. So the whole thing is on the face of it preposterous. But look at the way that Trump responded to the 2 assassination attempts. I mean, that's political courage of a very high order. So sometimes to the people who say, well, you know, Trump has this vice or that vice, he's very egotistical, he's kind of a bully. I say, all right, well, let's look at his vices, but let's also enumerate his many virtues.
Very well stated. And I think we also need to look at his vices in light of a global context and increasing globalism. When you're talking about America dealing with foreign policy, which we're not hearing a lot about that in this election, which I think is intentional. But when you talk about North Korea, you talk about China, you talk about Iran and what's happening on a global scale, I agree that his character is suited for America's viability. In your article for The American Thinker, you describe both character assassination and legal assassination as tactics that have been used against Trump. Which of these do you believe will have a more lasting impact on his life personally, but also on his political career?
With regard to the lawfare or the legal cases, I think Trump has been remarkably agile and successful in being able to deflect them. I mean, he's done an amazing rope-a-dope. Who would have thought that he would have been able to sort of survive this shotgun blast of legal cases, really aimed at locking him up and making it impossible for him to conduct a viable campaign? The character assassination is very diabolical because I think it is connected with the 2 actual assassination attempts. I mean, think of it this way. We've had a number of both assassinations and attempted assassinations in this country's history. I think back to Abraham Lincoln, for example, or JFK, or at least or attempted assassinations on Teddy Roosevelt and, of course, Ronald Reagan. But in no case was the opposing party for many years mounting a systematic assault, a kind of character attack on the person, essentially saying this guy's a dictator, he's an existential threat to democracy, he's Hitler circa 1933, almost providing a would-be assassin with a logical rationale for trying to take Trump out.
Yep. So you just talked about character a little bit. I've heard it said that when these near-death, experiences happen, these near assassination attempts happen, they affect the lives of people. How do you feel that first attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania impacted Trump, both politically and also personally?
I think it affected him very profoundly because he thought about the improbability of him surviving that kind of attack. I don't know if you've seen the little computer simulation. It's not just that Trump turned his head away and the bullet missed him. He could have turned his head away in 17 other ways and the bullet would have hit him. So he turned his head away in the only possible position it could have been for the bullet to miss. And he knows that. And so it makes you reflect upon the precariousness of human existence. It makes you reflect upon whether or not there is a providential destiny, not just for Trump himself, but for Trump as the leader of our country. And I think Trump has the view now, and perhaps he did before also, but he has it now more clearly, that he has a destiny to help to rescue the country at a very difficult time.
Yeah, you mentioned it, providential, absolutely, and certainly a miracle seeing his life spared. I got something I want to show you right now. Let's take a look at this clip.
We were all about democracy, and that's what we're about. And, you know, their theme is, oh, Trump will subvert democracy, but they're the ones that are going to subvert democracy, and that's what they're doing all the time.
I mean, did you do censorship? No. Did you lock up any leading Democrats? No. I mean, there were people chanting for Hillary to be locked up, but you didn't lock her up.
Let's defeat her in November.
Well, with Hillary as an example, I thought it would be a terrible thing, actually. What she did was terrible. What Biden did was terrible. What they all did. But I never would even think of doing that. I could have done it, and we had them dead to right, but wouldn't it be a terrible thing? And yet now, what they've done is they've opened up a box, a Pandora's box, that is a very dangerous thing.
So, Mark, I want to go ahead and bring you in. Mark is with us, president of Convention of States Action. Mark, can you just share some thoughts, create some context about some of the things we've discussed with Dinesh, vindicating Trump, but this idea of character assassination, legal assassination, where you see government headed right now. What are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that Dinesh does as well, if not better than anybody in the nation, is he captures the psyche of the American grassroots. That's what I do. I spend every day, all day with grassroots all over the country, and they love Dinesh and his movies because he's speaking for them. He's saying the things that they believe. He's doing it in a creative and an artistic way that inspires them. And I think, once again, he's nailed it here. This is what the American people actually know has happened to Trump. There's a reason that they consider Trump a heroic figure. He is a heroic figure, and I think Dinesh is doing a great service by showing him that way to the country.
Yeah, very well stated. Dinesh, we're just about 8 days away from the 2024 election. And one of the things that we learned from your film, 2,000 Mules, is that election fraud is very, very real. Do you believe that we can still have free and fair elections in America? Do you believe that there's hope for election integrity?
I think so. I'm feeling a lot better about things now than I did in 2020. I think that COVID created opportunities for massive fraud, and massive fraud did in fact take place. In fact, the election was stolen. But I think this time there are a lot more eyes on the election. The RNC is under better leadership, the Republican National Committee, the Trump campaign, and conservative activists around the country are alert. There have been a few episodes already in some of the states' problems, but they're highlighted immediately. I also think that once you see a film like 2,000 Mules, you cannot then go out and do the same kind of cheating the same way again. Because think about it, if mules show up in the middle of the night with backpacks full of ballots, wearing latex gloves and taking photos as the ballots go into the box, they're going to be patriots looking for that and waiting for them to bust them on the scene of the crime. So I'm not saying that the cheaters won't try some new stuff. They probably will. But I think it's going to be a little harder than it was the last time when, in a sense, nobody was paying sufficient attention.
Yep, so well said. Well, Dinesh, thank you so much for your insight. Such an important voice in our nation during this time. Be encouraged, my friend. Be bold in what you're doing. And folks, be sure to pick up the book. Make sure you go out and take a look at Dinesh's latest film, Vindicating Trump, and you can find out more at vindicatingtrump.com. Pastor Hank, my friend, want to come over to you to get some insight and some perspective to help us make sense of all these kinds of things.
Okay.
What's stirring in your heart with legal assassination and character assassination and voter fraud and election integrity? What's in your heart right now concerning where our nation is?
All right. Well, first and foremost, that was a great interview there with Dinesh. You know, the name of his book and movie is Vindication. And I really believe, you know, we often say hindsight is 2020. There are a lot of issues of 2020 that have not been settled yet and need to be settled. And we're going to see that God has not forgotten 2020. And there is a vindication that is coming concerning President Trump, but there's a vindication that is coming concerning those who felt like in 2020 their voice was not heard, their vote was not honored. Now, I say that because God speaks in the obvious, Pastor James. And I say that because when you look at a man who they had the Russia, the Mueller report, the fake dossier, the 2 assassination attempts. You look at all the different cases that they've tried to bring against him to convict him, and it's all fallen, like God said, like feathers. You have to see that God's hand is on the man, therefore his hand is on this country, and God has a plan. And I'll say this lastly, part of that plan is simply that God wants to raise up our country so that it can receive a certain outpouring of the Holy Spirit that is going to cause men to begin to call upon the name of the Lord to be saved, but also so that God's righteousness and justice can come and deal with evil that has been here for a very long time and do what I've been prophesying, and that is a reset that is going to cause the nations of the earth to rejoice because of the God factor. And you saw the God factor when Trump moved his head. That's only God. Well, the same God factor is going to reset this nation and is going to reset the earth for a season so that God can have his way.
Yeah, so well stated. And when you talk about the God factor, folks, I think it's so important for us to understand that God is committed to his agenda in the earth, and he'll use anybody who has a willing heart. Not necessarily folks that we qualify as being godly or righteous, but God looks at the heart. Man looks at the outward appearance. And I often say if there was hope for Nineveh and God had plans to save Nineveh, then God certainly has plans to save the United States of America, and we need to pray along those lines. I want to switch gears a little bit. There's some activity happening over in Virginia, the state of Virginia right now. A good friend and great man, Governor Glenn Youngkin, is fighting a battle there. Friends, take a look at this clip, and we're going to talk about what's happening with the Virginia voter rolls right now.
And more on the breaking news now. A federal judge just ordered Virginia to reinstate the more than 1,600 voters taken off the state's voter rolls after being identified as non-citizens. The Justice Department filed a lawsuit after their removal, which alleged that Virginia violated federal law by systematically removing those non-citizens from voter rolls too close to Election Day. Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin says the state will immediately petition the court for an emergency injunction.
Yeah, Harris, common sense is clearly not at play here, and that's our issue. And so the common sense answer is, of course, that if people have been taken off the voter roll, they're not able to affirm that they are a U.S. citizen, they shouldn't be voting. And they can, of course, affirm they are a U.S. citizen and get back on the voter roll. That is common sense. That's a process that's been working in Virginia for 18 years. And to have a federal judge order that we reinstate over 1,500 individuals back on the voter rolls doesn't comply with common sense, the Constitution, or Virginia law.
Every American needs to be focused right now on Virginia and what's happening with those non-citizens. Governor.
And Harris, last comment, get out and vote, folks. You know, this is an incredibly important election, and we are asking all common sense-minded Virginians and Americans, get out and vote.
Now, Mark, I want to start with you. Listening at that clip reminds us that common sense isn't that common anymore. And I spent time with Glenn Youngkin, and I think he's one of the best governors in our nation. He's a man of reason, a man of sound principle, a man who walks in the wisdom of God, a man of integrity. And this is really, really simple, but it seems that it's not that simple. When non-citizens declare and tell you that they're not citizens, I don't think you need a whole lot more to be able to do what's necessary, common sense wise, to see to it that we have integrity to our elections. What are your thoughts about what you see happening in Virginia there?
Yeah, I agree with everything you say about Glenn Youngkin, one of the best governors in the country, and I hope that when he's done with his term there, that there's a future for him in national politics. And I got to say, as a lawyer, this decision to me is completely outrageous. You have people who have self-identified. In other words, they have noted that they are ineligible to vote, and they are on the voter rolls, and Virginia just cleans them off the rolls, as every state should. Just outrageous that a judge would, in my opinion, violate the law directly and say that these people should be reinstated on the rolls.
Yep. So this has already been sent up to the Supreme Court just today, have been updated, and I think tomorrow they've given the DOJ some time to respond. I want to take a look at a tweet here that just came in not too long ago. The Lancaster Board of Elections just announced they've uncovered a major voter fraud scheme in Pennsylvania. But I thought Democrats said voter fraud was a hoax. According to the board, up to 2,500 fraudulent voter registration applications were dropped off in 2 batches shortly before the deadline. Authorities believe an organization is behind this fraud, and the district attorney has vowed to investigate and hold them responsible. So we're dealing with a situation that Glenn is fighting for integrity there in Virginia, and we're seeing that these things are happening. Here's a case study right here in the state of Pennsylvania. Mark?
Yeah, Pennsylvania has long been ground central for cheating, especially Philadelphia, but all across the state of Pennsylvania. Most observers believe that Pennsylvania is the critical state in this election. And so when you see cheating there, that's the heat of the battle. That's the point of the spear. We got to be all over it. And I'm really glad that they found this, and I think they're going to find a lot more.
Yeah. Let's take a look at this clip, and then, Hank, I want to hear from you and your thoughts about what's happening in Pennsylvania.
Good morning, everyone. District Attorney Heather Adams. On Tuesday afternoon, I was contacted by Krista Miller, who is our Chief Clerk of Elections, regarding potentially fraudulent voter registration applications that had recently been received by her office. At that time, she informed me that the Elections Office received approximately 2,500 applications at or near the deadline for registering to vote. While preparing to process these applications, staff noticed that numerous applications appeared to have the same handwriting, were filled out on the same day with unknown signatures, and some were previously registered voters, excuse me, and the signatures on file did not match the signatures on the application. So before I begin to summarize our preliminary findings, I must remind everyone that this is an ongoing investigation, and for that reason, I will be limited in the details that I can provide.
So, Pastor Hank, we can set the stage and help folks understand that ultimately what we're dealing with in America is a spiritual attack. This is a spiritual issue, and verses of scripture like Isaiah chapter 60, verse 2 come to mind for me, that darkness will cover the land and deep darkness is going to cover the people, even deeper darkness covering the people. Darkness is characterized by deception, manipulation, confusion, ignorance. All of those things characterize spiritual darkness. Can you give us some perspective about what's happening with this lack of integrity and darkness and deception that we're seeing in the last days?
Well, actually, the verse that you quoted, Pastor James, the Lord actually, I heard his voice very loud. It was actually at a FlashPoint Live in Minneapolis, and I was quoting that verse, and the Lord shouted, and he said, "Hank, but I, the Lord, shall arise, and my glory shall be seen." And this is what we have to see. Even though you look at cheating, you see all this stuff that they're doing. Listen, the devil, he's the father of lies. John 10, he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But this is the time now that God himself is declaring, the God factor, he's going to arise, and his glory and his light's going to be seen. The fact that we're talking about that they're catching this is part of proof to me that the Lord is exposing it. His light is beginning to break forth. But I want to say this, though, Pastor James, in your previous comment, you know, we're talking about Virginia. We shouldn't be surprised. You have to go back years ago when there was questions about Obama's birth certificate. Did that ever get settled? You know, you're supposed to be a United States citizen even to run for the presidency. You're supposed to be a citizen to vote. So they're trying everything that they can. But I believe that God is raising up a standard. And I think we've got to go back to what Ted Cruz was trying to do in 2020. And that was this. He said, let's just pause. Whether you think it was stolen or it wasn't, let's take a moment, and according to our law, we're allowed 10 days to sort this thing out. But I believe, lastly, Proverbs 6:31, if the thief be found, we need to have 2020 happen so that the thief could be found. He must pay back. I believe those of you that are watching tonight, don't be in fear. This is the payback time. God is moving, and the enemy's going to have to pay back. And if you read that verse in Proverbs 6:31, he has to give back 7 times and all the substance of his house. How about give back the White House and give back our freedoms, give back our country? I believe, Pastor James, that's where we're heading as the Lord is arising at this time, and we're going to see more and more things being exposed.
We're going to talk here in this second half about some exciting things that have been happening in New York. The iconic Madison Square Garden, known for great hockey, great basketball, great boxing events. A lot of iconic things have happened there. And something else iconic happened this weekend. There was a Trump rally. Take a look at this graphic here of this MAGA, they say, MAGA Square Garden is what they call it. And folks, we got something that's really exciting we're going to talk about here. Take a look at this clip as well. Some B-roll, just talking about some great things that are happening there. Thousands and thousands of people. I've heard reports of the facility being filled to capacity, more than 20,000 inside, 60 to 70,000 outside, if I'm not mistaken. Something is happening. Something is stirring. Something that cannot be denied in the hearts of people. And so we're going to talk about that here a little bit. I'm going to come back over to you, Mark. You can't deny that something is happening, whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, regardless of what you think. You see something shifting in the hearts of people. There was a rally there, all kinds of diversity, people from all walks of life. You've seen Trump in the Bronx. You've seen the response that he's gotten there. He's a New York guy through and through. And more, you're seeing a shift in the hearts of people, and there's more of a coalition building, you know, even reaching outside of the traditional Republican Party. When you see folks like RFK and you see Tulsi Gabbard and you see Elon Musk joining behind the vision that Trump is putting in front of our nation, something unique is happening that we haven't seen before. How do you frame what you see happening that's unique about this particular time that we're living in?
Yeah, for me, to contextualize it, I go all the way back to 2009 and the beginning of the Tea Party movement, which I participated in leading. And that's when this feeling started, in my opinion. And Trump is the final point of the spear coming out of that movement. That was a movement that was, I would argue, inherently populist. It was just regular people stepping up, good people, God-fearing people, people who love their country, people who are patriots. And that's what we see in Trump. Trump is now the standard bearer, not just for the Tea Party movement, but obviously having grown into the MAGA movement, now bringing in RFK Jr., the MAHA movement, Make America Healthy Again. And this is a movement of regular American people. And Pastor James, I have to say, that's what America's made up of. It's not what you see on CBS and NBC and ABC. This is a country made up of regular American people who are extraordinary. That's what Trump represents, and that's what he's bringing together.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the narrative, we hear so much about the negativity and the accusations of Trump being like Hitler, and pretty much the end of the world is going to happen if he gets elected. Not to mention he's already been president, so we already have an idea to some degree of what will happen. And I actually saw a clip pretty recently here that I thought was very impactful about a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor spoke up about the claims of Trump being Hitler, being compared to Hitler, and he was offended by that idea as to say, you know what? You don't know what Hitler was like. You don't know what folks like myself went through. And I do also think that that is really a disservice to folks that have survived, you know, and gone through the Holocaust to have to deal with that. Pastor Hank, what do you say?
Well, first and foremost, yeah, I think people like to make up a lot of things that aren't true, and the truth keeps coming out. But I do want to say this, at the break, you mentioned about the likeness between you and, man, our host, Pastor Gene Bailey. I did a double take at first. You guys have the same ties. Anyway, I get compared to Jesus a lot without a beard, so I get it. But you know what I want to say about New York, Pastor James? That was amazing. God has been prophesying through this vessel here since 9/11, where the Lord said, watch New York, out of the place of New York, where you were wounded as a nation, where your towers fell. I will raise up one, born and raised there, who will be raised up and bring this nation back on course again. And for the towers that fell, I'll give them a term. And I'm telling you, I believe that, those towers that fell, it's time for 45 dash to become 47. And then the Lord began to prophesy in 2012. He said, look, in 2010, look at the 240th year of America's reign. There will be a battle over New York. And when you see this, you will know that I am revisiting this country again. And of course, that was 2016. It came down to New York. Hillary Clinton based her office up there in New York City, and it was Trump versus Hillary, and Trump won. Here we go again. This is huge, that Madison Square Garden. I know Mark would probably know a lot better than I would, that I think the last time that happened was under Ronald Reagan. I think this is an indication that something is shifting. Could New York go red? I mean, this is really, I'd love to hear Mark's take on it.
Yeah. Let's jump right into that. I have that thought as well. Mark, do you think there's a chance that Trump can flip New York?
Yeah, I mean, right now, I don't think that's the case. When you look at all the polling, it doesn't look like it's close enough for that. But the question is, what's the wave look like? And if the wave comes and breaks, I don't like to predict red waves. The last time we did that was 2022, and it didn't work out well for us. But we do know that there are states that are not traditionally close that are now close. States like New Mexico, which is apparently on the margin. Virginia is in the margin. And there are states that often go blue that look like they could go red in this wave. I'm just not sure it's going to go as far as New York.
So I agree with you that most likely it won't happen, but we can certainly pray. I want to just kind of dial this up again, this conversation about this comparison to Hitler and the Nazis, which I think is most unfortunate. And even before we look at this next clip, I'm reminded in 2 Timothy chapter 3, when Paul says that in the last days, perilous times are going to come. Just another indication that this is spiritual. Perilous is a word kalipos, which means demon-filled times. And one of the characterizations of people that he says is going to be evident in the last days is slander. You're seeing more and more slander. It happens all over, but we're seeing that tremendously on the left, with those with progressive ideology. I say if America falls, man, God help the world. And if we ever cease to be a Christian nation, I believe that has cataclysmic effect globally. And I want to take a look at this tweet here. More than 10,000 Christians are currently marching through the streets of Dublin, Ireland, in a march for Jesus, and this certainly is incredible. We see that believers all over the world are standing and praying for the church in America. This is not just something that affects America, it's something that affects the entire world, and many believers around the world understand that.
Yeah, praise God for that. I mean, that's so inspiring to see. But if you travel to Europe today, whether it's Ireland or the rest of the United Kingdom or France or Germany or Italy, what you see is churches that are shut down, pews that are empty. And this, what you're seeing there, is a remnant rising. God bless the remnant, and I hope it is a portent, a powerful portent of things to come. But right now, I'm worried that we're losing Europe. You see 10,000 people marching in the streets there. I don't know how many more there are than that in Ireland right now that are still professing Christians. I worry about that.
Yeah, so I have this thought that comes to mind. Pastor Hank, you got some thoughts there?
Yeah, I do, because here's the thing. Now, I'm different than Mark's perspective. Let me just say this. To me, that's a sign, because 2 Chronicles 7 says if we do our part, if we humble ourselves, we seek his face, we turn from our wicked ways, if we acknowledge him before men, he'll acknowledge us before the Father. God said he then will do his part. He'll do his turn. And I feel right now we are in the earth. It's God's turn now. There's enough of the remnant the small amount of us that are doing things like that 10,000 that's getting God's attention. And I think that's what's going to release the global awakening that's going to affect the masses.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly believe the remnant is indeed rising around the world. This is the time I'm often reminded that Jesus says, my sheep will hear my voice. And this is the time I believe that believers around the world are rising up to either hear the prophetic voice of God or the political voice of man. And we have to remember, from Genesis to Revelation, the whole Bible is about governments and kings and kingdoms. I say that the first election happened in the Garden of Eden, and the devil, through the serpent, was the first politician, and he campaigned to establish his platform over God's platform, and Adam voted for the devil and his ways and his platform instead of voting for God. You guys agree with that assessment in terms of this is about the will of man versus the will of God? And I just want to kind of, we're coming to the end of the show here, but this is not even about Trump. And I think sometimes folks will say, hey, all they talk about Trump. Let's take Trump out of the picture and let's talk about which platform best supports God's agenda in the earth. I want to bring this back to center for believers around the world to know that this is about God's kingdom coming, God's will being done, and which party is most aligned with what it is that God is doing. Just any closing thoughts here, gentlemen? Pastor Hank, I'll start with you, and then Mark, I want to hear from you.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great to have you, James. You're doing a great job, and also great to be with Mark. He's always profound. I think we're at Exodus 32:26, where the Lord told Moses, go before the nation and say who is on the Lord's side. And it's not hard to see the differences of the parties and of the candidates. And it's not hard to see what God likes and what he doesn't like. And I think that's how you have to approach this as you go to the voting booth. What does God like? What side am I siding with, God or evil? It's that simple.
Yep. Mark, and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we're living in a 1 Samuel 8 moment, and there is a fundamental question facing the American people and really the whole world. And that question is, we want a king. What kind of a king do we want? Who is really the king? And I think it's a fair warning about Donald Trump. He's not our salvation. He is not our Messiah. Now, on a personal level, I think he's the better candidate, and that's who I'll be voting for. But we shouldn't put our hope in him. We should put our hope in the one true king, and that one true king is Jesus Christ.
That's exactly it. So well said. Folks, I just remind you that I often say that there is no book in the Bible called Nebuchadnezzar, but there's a book called Daniel. There's no book called Artaxerxes, but there is a book called Nehemiah. There's no book called Ahasuerus, but there's a book called Esther. God has never needed a government institution to advance his kingdom. He always does so through his people, through the prayers of his people.